Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. So I thought that with me kind of getting into my end of year content that there's a little bit of a gap in terms of like, hey, I discussed my thoughts on the kind of final thoughts on the Netflix show for the end of the year until we get like the trailer and the release. I haven't talked about kind of my thoughts, where I'm at with the 2025 Avatar animated movie in a while. So let's do that. Keep in mind, coming up in the next couple of days will be my 2023 Avatar Year in Review video. I'm pretty sure I'm going to release that on the 23rd of December. And then the 2024 Avatar Year Preview will be coming out on the 30th. So consider this sort of extra videos kind of as part of the kind of end of year wrap up. So let's talk about this, because I think the last time I properly talked about the movie probably was when the image got kind of mistakenly released, and I kind of talked about it a little bit. But let's kind of recap kind of what we know. And again, for the most part, I'm going off basically information we know officially. I've included a few bits and pieces of kind of rumored information just so we have some stuff to go off for speculation, but do keep in mind we know very little about this movie overall at all. So what we do have here is that right now it does not have an official title, so it will for now and until they finally give us that title be the 2025 Avatar: The Last Airbender animated movie. So they have confirmed that like it's going to be about Aang and friends. The image, of course, did show us, you know, the Team Avatar as adults, so we know that's what it's going to be. It's the time skip kind of Avatar movie that we've kind of always wanted. Release date is October 10th, 2025, and so far that has not changed since it was announced a while ago at this point. We'll see as we get closer to release if it does change. It's towards the end of 2025, so you do feel almost any delay would get to the point where it gets pushed out of the year, and that would be, I think, pretty disastrous if this does change to 2026. They really need to hit that. It's been so long since we found out about this stuff. They need to hit this date. Rumored titles, there have been one or two. So currently, and you'll note that it's still up on like IMDb, Echoes and Aftershocks. So specifically Avatar: The Last Airbender, Echoes and Aftershocks has been the first, and it's been the most sort of consistent rumor about maybe what the title could be. At one point, The Hidden Kingdom or just Hidden Kingdom was mentioned at some point. Not sure how much there really was behind this one, but it gives you a sense for kind of roughly what we're dealing with. I would say this is very generic. This really tells you very little, because effectively this movie is going to be our kind of introduction to effectively a new era for Team Avatar, because we have so little content with them as adults. So the idea that like Echoes and Aftershocks of what? Like, is it the end of the war? Well, we already saw that in the comics. So is it the kind of time period before where this movie is actually going to take place, at which point we don't even know what that's going to be. Hidden Kingdom gives you a little bit more to it, because obviously the title directly suggests a potentially like new location on the map, or a new kind of big city that has sort of sprung up. And there's a potential for that like all across the Earth Kingdom. There's a lot of powerful cities from like the past eras that someone could go in, take over, and that could be an interesting threat for a movie. Potentially there's islands all across the world where you could do stuff with. That's become a pretty common plot point with a lot of content, is to be like, ooh, a secretive island here or there. So they could do something like that, but ultimately we are just still waiting for the official title. Then, confirmed characters based on the image that we were not meant to see, plus some casting information. So we know Aang's going to be in the movie, of course, Katara's going to be in the movie, Sokka, Toph, and Zuko. They're the 5 characters who were pictured in the image. Again, I'm not showing the image just because I know Paramount doesn't really like that it got out there, and I know they probably wouldn't do anything to the video if I did include it here, but I really don't want to risk the video. You all know what the image looks like. You can find it out there. I think everyone has it at this point. It's pretty easy to find if you are looking for it. So yeah, they're the 5 confirmed characters. I think specifically these 3 were mentioned in casting information, but the kind of 5 core members of Team Avatar here, no mention of Suki, which is a little bit kind of frustrating. But given where I suppose they showed off this image to people who maybe, especially because like we've never seen adult Suki, so we don't really know what she looks like. If she did have maybe a little bit of slightly different character design, it might be tricky to maybe make it out. I don't know. They're doing. It's weird that we don't know so much about Suki, but that's kind of what we're hoping. Maybe when they get closer to release, they begin to talk about that sort of stuff a little bit more. So other known information about the movie is that the casting information is suggesting that Aang is going to be 24 in the movie. And based on the fact that we know the character's ages, we can base all the rest of it from age gap. So Katara is going to be 26. That would make Sokka 27. Toph, of course, is the same age as Aang, so she'd also be 24. And then Zuko is of course, a year older than Sokka. He'd be 28 if this is how it actually goes. And I think this fits if you've seen the image with how the characters look. To me, they don't look super old, but I think you could tell with Zuko and Sokka that, you know, they definitely look a little bit older, whereas, you know, the likes of Aang does look like he is on still in his kind of early 20s. So I think an interesting one. They might adjust this slightly, but the basic idea seems to be that they're going for the characters in their mid-20s. So that's the idea here. Now, in terms of timeline, where does this put us? This will put the movie about 8 to 9 years after the most recent comics. So I put Aang as being around 15, maybe 16 in Imbalance, which is kind of basically the most recent stuff. And of course, that means we are 9 or 8 years, depending on what way you're reviewing that, to get to Aang being 24. So we're nearly a full decade after the comics, so there's going to be a large gap once again between where the comics are versus where we get to here. So a lot of stuff could have happened in the meantime, and we are full on going, like skipping through quite a bit of these characters' lives to get to where this movie is. Going with the timeline in the other direction, this places the movie being 16 years before the Yukon incident. So the Yukon incident happens when Aang is 40. He literally, in that sequence, mentions like, hey, I'm 40 years old, Toph, you can stop calling me Twinkle Toes. So to get to 24, you go back 16 years. So that gives you a sense for where we're going with here. We are in the range where we could see some of the older children, basically some of the older cast from Korra, of course. So basically we're talking about the likes of Bumi and Azumi here. There is a slight chance they've already been born, but because we don't know the ages of a lot of these characters, so we don't know Bumi's age, we don't know Kaya's age, we know Tenzin's age, but we don't know the age gap between the siblings, so we can only estimate. I think I did this in a previous video. I might as well go through it again, just for anyone wanting to see a little bit of the kind of maths behind this. So, again, this is just a technicality of, like, at the end of ATLA, we don't really have confirmation of if effectively like a full year has passed. So like, is Aang 12 or is he 13 at the end of the show? Similarly for like Katara, is she 14 or 15 at the end? Give or take like 3 months, like it's a very weird thing. Either way, going with the idea that Aang is 13 at the end of ATLA, that makes Katara 15. Korra is set 70 years after ATLA, that's confirmed. That means that if Aang was alive in Korra, he'd be 83. That would make Katara 85, so that's how old she is at the start of Korra. Korra herself is 17, and Tenzin is confirmed to be 51. So you do, basically, Aang's age minus Korra's age, and this is how we got that Aang was 66 when he died. You then do Katara's age when she's older minus Tenzin's age, and we find out that she was 34 when she had Tenzin, and Aang was 32 when Tenzin was born. And then this is where we get into the guessing games of like, Bumi and Kaya are both older than Tenzin. Bumi seems to be about 8 to 10 years older than Tenzin, and Bumi is also looks about 4 to 6 years older than Kaya, based on the family picture, which is here. So it's really hard to tell. So you can tell like Tenzin is maybe like 1 or 2 here. Bumi looks like he's 10, 11, 12. So again, it's a range. It's very hard to tell. Kaya looks like she's maybe 4 or something like that. So you can sort of see where I'm going with this here of like, he's roughly like 8, 9, 10 years older than Tenzin, and he's about 6 or something like that, 5 years older than his sister, Kaya. So again, it's all based on estimates, obviously, and that's how we get that. With some of the other stuff, trying to figure out like Izumi's age, for instance, is kind of weird because the information is very different. So you're like Iroh 2, he was confirmed somewhere to be 36. So you do minus 17 to get his age when Iroh's age when Aang died. So it puts him at 19 when Aang died. So that's that. So Iroh is born when Aang is 47 and when Zuko is 51. Zuko's 20 in the comics. Izumi, you would guess, has to be probably about 18 at this point, maybe 31 at the oldest, because, of course, she is Iroh's mother, of course. So, like, you're trying to figure it out kind of all in that way. So then you do 51 minus 36 here, and you get 15, and I forget exactly what these numbers are really meant to represent, but either way, I think I logic this through at the time as in like the oldest possible for Izumi is like 30 to 31 to make the kind of timeline stuff work out. So you again, it's this weird thing where you have a rather large age range because we don't have any kind of set position where Izumi specifically is born. So it's very difficult to properly tell because judging, say, like Bumi compared to Izumi, it's kind of difficult to tell their kind of age range or gaps. But that's just a little bit of an insight into kind of what we're talking about here. You know, even if there is one or two of the kids kind of floating around the place, you know, beyond it being mentioned, how much of a focus is that going to be? It's hard to properly say. But for the likes of basically Bumi, it does put it in the range where basically Bumi is either already born or will be born in the year or two following the events of this movie. So like we're getting to that kind of close period where a lot of the kind of kids are maybe going to come into play, of course. Now, admittedly, for say like, you know, Toph and stuff like that, because like what Lin and Tenzin are like the same age, that means like Toph's kind of kids happened like quite a bit after this. So, you know, we're not in the age range for that sort of stuff just yet, but it's just interesting to kind of put into perspective kind of what we're talking about there. Now, getting into the plot, we don't know anything about the plot at all officially. The casting suggests that Aang and Katara specifically are the leads for the movie, which seems to suggest that the other members of Team Avatars won't be as much of a focus, but they're probably still going to be there, but clearly it seems like Aang and Katara together will be the kind of main characters, which I guess makes sense. I'm guessing we're going to be on Air Temple Island, or at the very least in early-ish Republic City, and it would make sense that the two of them will be kind of together there, kind of trying to help the city in those kind of early days. I do think a lot depends on like what they're going to do with the movie. Like, is this just going to be a standalone, one-off Avatar movie, or is this going to have plot set up for future projects that cover this era? That's what I think very difficult to kind of tell right now, because none of the other projects have been officially announced. Like, we know they're going to do 3 movies. At some point, somewhere, they're going to announce series, and all these other type of projects. But we don't know specifically what eras they're going to be in. Rumors, of course, suggest that like the second movie will be Zuko focused. So the idea is basically, is that going to be a sequel to the 2025 movie, or is it just another movie that happens to be set in this era, but it could be like a few years beforehand or afterwards? And, you know, will any of this link into, will there be series for this? The problem here is just that there are a bunch of other eras that they could do. Like, we're expecting them to realistically do the Avatar after Korra, we're probably expecting to do at some point some Korra continuation content. And then I think there is a big demand for like to do something with Kyoshi and other avatars, to introduce new avatars and fill in some gaps, and to do other content with other avatars like Wan and stuff like that. So there's demand across the board. Like, they have so much material to work with depending on what they want to do. It makes sense that they're leading with Avatar first, because it's going to, in a way, guarantee the most immediate success. But the question is really about, yeah, is it just a kind of one-off movie that it's the obvious thing, they have to do it, and this will just kind of be almost that kind of wish fulfillment movie of just, here you go, it's the movie you've always wanted, let's see how this goes? Or are they actually planning a larger plot for the Team Avatar characters as adults? It's tricky, because the notes about this first movie, that I think the things that are very important here, is that, one, it's the first Avatar Studios project, this movie. It's going to be their first ever movie as well. It's going to be the first Avatar animation in 11 years by the time of release. 2014 is when Korra ended, to 2025, the release of this movie. It's going to be the first main content with a proper focus on the ATLA crew as adults. We've seen glimpses before, but this is going to be a proper insight into it. So it is the launch. Avatar Studios will be the launch of a new era for Avatar. So is the movie just going to be this kind of nostalgia project to interest everybody, create an immediate success, and ATLA is not actually going to be like the absolute focus of Avatar Studios? Or is it actually going to be a massive focus? My view on Mike and Brian is that they will want to do multiple eras and just have different things going on. But I think business-wise, they probably know that to, in a way, allow them to be more creative elsewhere, they have to also deliver with the stuff that's going to be an absolute guaranteed success, and that is kind of meeting the demand which is out there from the fandom at large, which would be for more Avatar: The Last Airbender content. It makes sense, because I think it is required. I think even if you absolutely love the other eras, I think it's hard to make the argument that ATLA, especially this kind of the characters as adults, is not needed. I absolutely think it is. Just the amount of discussion there's been, it's really something that we have needed for quite a while. So we're getting into the specifics. Is it just going to be the kind of fan service movie that kind of plays into the idea of it just being the thing everyone has wanted for years, that we'll get sort of like a lot of anime movies that are almost, for like animes, like almost non-canon in a way? The idea that like it's character focused, we get to know the characters as adults here, but there's a villain here, but it's a villain that they're capable of beating, but is challenging enough that the characters will get to showcase their abilities in their prime. So you basically just give people exactly what they want from this movie, and that is, hey, we're going to spend time with all of the ATLA Team Avatar members. You get specific scenes with them. We'll confirm a few details that we don't really have as of like the end of the show and the comics. We'll have all these kind of like in scenes for people who are in the know, while also introducing kind of fun new dynamics. But then also delivering in the action sequences of like, hey, how amazing is Katara in her like absolute prime? How incredible is Aang as like an adult, fully realized Avatar? How is Fire Lord Zuko sort of like 10 years into his reign or something like that? That's the sort of stuff that we're kind of looking for here, is just to see, yeah, we want to see that stuff, because we saw the characters sort of like past their prime in Korra, and we haven't really seen them in action during this era. And so is that just what we're doing here, or is there more to it? So I don't know, because there's always the opportunity for them to kind of do this and then just kind of create a plot hook at the end for like the next movie. And one of the obvious ones, getting into some kind of notable kind of plot elements here, would be Azula. We don't know what happens with Azula. She's not in Korra. The Azula comic that came out this year is the furthest into the timeline we know of her character, and that's a very open-ended ending to that comic. We don't know what she's up to next, beyond that she's going to sort of continue as is, continuing to create these groups around her and kind of in a way mismanage them from that point on. Is that what we're maybe going to build up to here, as like this is a cycle that repeats itself for years with Azula, and these movies are maybe going to be where they resolve her plot point. This is the final kind of time Azula kind of creates a group that is causing kind of chaos in the world, and we deal with her, we do the character development required for her, and we address what's up with her. Because the big thing that I think they need, if they're doing a lot of Avatar content, is that they need a villain. Because the Yukon stuff isn't for 16 years after this. Otherwise, like, we don't really know of anything in particular that happens during the characters' lives that is a major threat, but there's likely a decent amount of stuff that happens. So Azula does make sense to be this kind of last big villain in a way for the kind of ATLA era during this little gap that we have to deal with. Fan favorite, really liked character. I think everyone wants them to do something with her, and what better way to do it than on the kind of biggest stage imaginable. It makes a lot of sense, but I don't think it's going to be in this first movie. Maybe a tease into the second movie that's more Zuko focused, but we have to wait and see. Republic City it's obviously going to, I guess, have to be a focus to a certain degree, but is this what the plot will be about? That's where I sort of struggle with this one, because in the timeline, as far as we're aware, Republic City should be like established pretty much at this point. I think the timeline stuff that particularly points this out is I think we know Gamu's age. Gamu's 55, and I think his bio said that he was born in Republic City. That means that because he's 55, Korra said 70 years afterwards. That means 15 years after the end of ATLA, Republic City is for sure in place. And that puts it as, I think, 3 years after this movie is set, Republic City for sure is in place, but it could have been properly established at that point. And that is what we're looking for, is fully in place, called Republic City, part of the United Republic, that it's like officially a nation of nations. That's what we're looking for here. The setup obviously is well in place from the comics, and we know where it gets to in Korra, but is it in place at this point? I think it makes sense based on the Gamu thing that it would be, but it probably is the relatively early years of it being truly a nation to itself. But is that going to be the focus? And I'd struggle with the idea if that is what the focus is, because it suddenly is a very political plot to have, just to deal with like stuff going on in that sense, because we've tackled the issues in Balance, and we've also tackled the issues after the fact in Korra. Is it super interesting, and is it unique enough to basically focus on Republic City again? Because I do think they run the risk a little bit of tiring people out on the topic if they don't have anything else going on. My guess and my hope would probably be that, like, is it just they'll do enough to kind of fill in some gaps about Republic City, but it will mostly just be the idea of, well, it makes sense for a lot of the characters to be here in or around Republic City, but that the plot of the movie would be elsewhere. If it is Hidden Kingdom, of course, that would make sense. They have to go to this place. If there's echoes and aftershocks of something, they'd have to go to that location. But I think it probably would be for the best to not have the plot overly focused on Republic City, but Republic City will need to be used in the movie. That's the basic idea there. I think Toph, also with Republic City, is one of the more interesting elements, because the police force, and specifically Toph being like involved in law enforcement, is a plot point you have to get into eventually. We have the setup for why more metal benders exist from the comics, but we haven't really addressed Toph, like, I'm the chief of police now, and how exactly that comes about. That'll be an interesting one to see. Like, given that we're in early-ish Republic City, does she become sort of like a sheriff or a kind of marshal before it's fully established itself? We have to wait and see what's going on there. And then I also have this just as another idea of like stuff that we could learn about this movie just by the fact that it is exploring these characters so many years on. There's a bunch of open plot threads from like the comics and stuff like that that we just don't know anything about. One of the really obvious ones is Zuko and May's relationship. Where they are in the comics right now, they have been broken up, and they have been broken up since it's in the sense the promise, basically. But the most recent content involving both of these characters in the same story was Smoke and Shadow, which was quite a while ago at this point, and we haven't really returned to it in all of that time. But we are getting to the point where, based on the timeline, Izumi is probably going to be born within a couple of years of this movie taking place. So surely he's in that relationship at this point, and I think most people do lean towards canonically the relationship is going to be Zuko and May, but we don't actually know what the details are. So this is one of those ones where even if May is perhaps maybe not a huge focus in the movie, it is something that they could confirm very quickly in the movie what's going on. Suki, like anything, like just Suki appearing in this movie would be great, but especially if they, if Suki and Sokka are still together, whatever way that exactly is going to go, because it brings up the idea of like, we don't really know what Sokka's up to at this point, because his timeline is kind of weird because like, he's a council member by the time of the Yukon incident. He then, after the council, becomes the chief of the Southern Water Tribe. So this might be before either of those two things. So is he just hanging out in and around Republic City, or is he in some sort of an earlier role that is effectively representative in Republic City for the Southern Water Tribe? Because Hakoda, like, it's still going to be alive at this point, we assume, obviously, because we're not skipping ahead that long. So there is stuff like, say, like Hakoda and Melina from the North and South comic. Have they gotten married in the meantime? That's a bit of an interesting kind of plot point, because there theoretically is a scenario where like they have a child together, and so Sokka and Katara end up having like a sibling. That could be a thing. We're not really sure what the full situation is there, but they could do some stuff by showing off Hakoda and Melina. And on a similar note to that, Ki is a comic so far exclusive character who we would maybe hope to see something about, and it feels like some of the comments made about stuff like the fact that they're not going to adapt comics into projects, and that people who have read the comics will understand stuff, including being aware of the identity of certain characters before the material directly addresses it. Ki feels like the really obvious kind of answer to that, because if you could at all back to the Fire Nation capital in this movie, and you start maybe with Zuko there, you're probably going to have to address the idea of, okay, who is Zuko in a relationship with? And then address the fact that, like, oh yeah, Ursa's over here, and people who haven't read the comics will be like, when did she get back here? Why is Ursa married to someone else? And why does Zuko have a different sister that's not Azula? Like, there are some things that they're going to have to tackle in an interesting way when we get to it. And I'm wondering, are they going to ignore that for this first movie and just have Zuko maybe just already be in Republic City because he and Aang are the ones who, like, canonically are the ones who properly, officially help to establish it? At least the main two names involved in that. But then this potential second movie that is Zuko focused might be, that's when we get into more of his family stuff that's going on here. Some other details would be, for instance, like, has Aang found the other Sky Bison and Lemurs at this point? Because this is something that has to happen in the meantime, because of course we know that there are other Sky Bison by the time of Korra, and like the Tenzin and the other temples have bison again, have lemurs. We know at least an origin of this with the Bonte tribe, but like, is that where Aang found them from? Because they never directly confirmed that. that the reason there are other bison and lemur out here is because Aang visited the Bonte tribe at one point, or did he just find sky bison elsewhere, and so on. Like there's some interesting stuff like that. Then we also have Zuko's animal companion, and that is his dragon, Druk. From the RPG, we know Zuko found Druk in his 20s. So if he's going to be 28 in this movie, I'm pretty sure he already has Druk. It's specifically stated in the RPG that he found Druk as a juvenile dragon. So that to me says that, like, he's not a super young dragon, but he's not, like, fully grown. But if there's been a few years since then, I'm pretty sure Druk probably should be just about in play. Now, the question is obviously going to be, like, the second you do earlier content with Druk, it speaks to the idea of, like, come on, you have to comment on that in the meantime, or something like that. And there's some interesting stuff with this. Of just, are you just going to continue with the idea of, like, no one asking Zuko where he got the dragon from in the era where there's not really many dragons, and what's going on there? It would give the gang multiple ways to fly places, where, like, if, like, Zuko had to go off with if Sokka had to go off with Zuko, they could just go in the dragon while Katara and Aang go over here. All this sort of stuff can theoretically happen. They're all the notes I have here, because it is so difficult to actually speculate about the movie when we know absolutely nothing about what's going to happen here, beyond that the characters that we know are probably going to be in this movie doing stuff, and roughly the time era of where it's taking place. I think the discussion is more about, I think, this. What type of a movie do we want? Do we want it to be plot-focused, interlinked with other projects that Avatar Studios are doing? Or do we kind of just want the more kind of, like, fan service-y style movie where it is just the amazing action scenes with these characters that we want? It's lots of character focus of just getting the characters talking to each other when they're older. Or do we want an extra layer of in-depth plot to have happened with all the characters in their 20s, and that's what we're doing here? Mike and Brian, to me, come across as creators who wouldn't necessarily want to just do the fan servicey movie. They would want to make sure everything that they're doing, especially their first movie, is impactful beyond just the amazing nostalgia factor that's going to be here with this movie, but that it actually has major impact as well. I think this is one of those ones when we find out more about the other projects, like what this first series is, if they ever confirm the second movie specifically to be Zuko focused, that's the sort of stuff that where, like, then we can start to, I think, properly speculate on, okay, this is how the projects are going to interlink together. Because that will tell us, like, oh, what eras are they focusing on for the first couple of projects? Which ones aren't they focusing on? Because ultimately, like I said, it makes sense. The nostalgia is going to be huge for this, especially, I think, after Netflix Avatar. If they can time the proper announcement of stuff about this movie in the right parts of the year, alongside Netflix Avatar, they could really, really go places, I think, with this. I think there could be huge excitement about this. Like, if they were to just officially post the image that we have for this movie out there online, like, say, on, like, Christmas Day, can you imagine how excited everyone would be just that they know now what Avatar Studios is actually about, rather than the vagueness that we kind of have at the moment? That's what we're kind of missing here. And you'll note when we get into my end of year content, the 2023 year in review and the 2024 preview, a lot of what I have to say about stuff like Avatar Studios is just communicate. They just need to communicate, like, news, talk about what this is, because you've given us so little so far. It's amazing that we know a movie is coming, but if your plan is for all of these interlinked things, you've got to talk about it now, kind of sooner rather than later. So that's where I'm going to wrap up this video. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the 2025 Avatar animated movie. And I think, like I said, the thing I really want to know your comments on is, the whole idea of what type of movie will it be? Should they do the kind of classic, almost anime movie style thing and just do this sort of almost like fan servicey movie that's like amazingly animated, amazing action scenes, and it's just cool getting to see the characters? Or should it be plot focused and link into everything else and be a full-on new Avatar The Last Airbender era? I definitely want to know what you guys think about that, and if you have any speculation specifically on what the plot will be. But otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.